it's Jennifer from Flux. In this video, I'm going to show you how to knit the Ganymede Cowl. This is a cozy, warm, beautifully colored cowl that comes to a point down the front. It's almost like sort of like a faux mini poncho. It's a really fun piece to wear. It's a little different than your average cowl. All we're going to do is simply use some easy knit stitches. Now, most of you who watch this channel know that I do mostly crochet projects, but I am part of the Little Gifts blog hop. It is a knitting blog hop, and there's going to be all kinds of little gifts that you can make using your knitting skills. If you're not a knitter, have no fear. I'm going to walk you through this project every single stitch of the way, from casting on to working all of our stitches. Now we've created some very, very easy texture here. You can see there are some pretty little eyelets, to going through the project, binding off, and then we're going to learn how to seam it. So as you can see, there's a seam up here that creates, now this is where your head goes. So it kind of wraps around you and this point comes down the front. So it's going to keep the front of you nice and warm too. If the wind's blowing against you, it's going to come down. If you're wearing your jacket, it's going to come down the front and really keep you nice and cozy. We're going to be using some cake yarn. I'm going to get to that in a moment. But the yarn is variegated, so the yarn colors are going to do all the work for you, so we don't really have to worry about that today. But like I said, if you've never knitted before, this is a super easy project. Be sure, I'll put the link down below, but be sure and check out all the other projects on the blog hop. If you're learning how to knit, this is little projects that you can do, and the little ones are nice and easy to start out with if you're learning how to knit. Instead of committing to like a giant blanket when you're learning how to knit, doing little projects like this are a great way to learn and build your skills over time. So without further ado, let's get started. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about sizing. Now, we basically are going to knit a long rectangle and seam it together. So the width of our rectangle here is about 14 inches, give or take. Now it's going to depend on your tension. If you're learning how to knit, sometimes your tension can be a little bit snug, and that's perfectly normal. If you crochet, you'll know that that's normal as well. Now the opening around the neck is going to be a circumference of about, now let me just position my tape measure here. It's going to be a circumference of about, I'm getting about 22 inches. Now it does V, it's a nice flattering V neck. And the length of our rectangle is about 32 to 36 inches. Now that's going to change with the seam, and you can really make this as long as you like. I had a little bit of yarn left over, just a smidge. As you can see here, I didn't use the entire 3 cakes. I used almost 3 cakes. Okay, so you'll have a little bit extra if you wanted to add some fringe or pom-poms or what have you. So without further ado, let's learn how to jump in and get started on this project. It's nice and easy if you've never learned how to knit. I'm going to show you everything. I'm going to show you how to cast on using the long tail cast on, which is super easy. We're going to go through the whole project. We're going to learn how to bind off and seam our work. Okay, so let's get started. For this project, you'll need a pair of scissors, a tapestry needle, a ruler or tape measure will be really helpful to get the size that you need. We're also going to be using a pair of US 13 knitting needles. These are 9mm, and straight and sort of on the long side would be a little bit easier. And then let's talk about the yarn. The yarn that we're going to be using is called Mandala Thick and Quick. We're going to be using 3 cakes of this. This comes in cakes, as you can see. Each cake of this yarn is about 87 yards, 79 meters, 150 grams, 5.3 ounces. And it comes in lots of different colors. I'm going to be using the thumbprint colorway, and it does come in dye lot. So if you replicate the same yarn, just make sure you stick with the same dye lot. And you know, so the colors are going to change for us, but later on when we go from one cake to the other, I'm going to show you how to join those on. So let's get started. So to begin, we're going to pull some yarn out of our yarn cake here, and we're going to be using the long tail cast on. Now I'm going to go through this video assuming that you're a beginner, so that if you are a more advanced knitter, you can either use the slow motion, fast motion feature of YouTube, where you can kind of speed things up or slow things down. And also you can skip through any parts that you may already know. So we are going to use the long tail cast on, so that requires us to estimate a little bit of yarn to pull out to get onto our needles. As a side note, for those of you who are more seasoned knitters, if you have a preferred way of casting on, please feel free to do that. We're going to cast on 32 stitches to begin. So I'm going to do probably like 2 arms length. I would always err on the side of too much yarn and having a long tail rather than you know, having not enough and having to start over. Okay, so just grab one of your needles to begin, and what we're going to do is we're going to put a slip knot onto our needle. That will count as our first stitch. So wrap the yarn around your fingers to make a loop, bring the yarn behind the loop, reach in with your needle, bring up that loop there in the middle, and tighten onto your needle. So this is our first stitch. Now for the long tail cast on, you're going to let the yarn sort of hang down like this. It's sort of like an upside down V, if you can see that. On the right, we have our working yarn. This is called the working yarn. It's connected to the yarn ball. And then we have our tail, which we will be using to cast on, and whatever's left over we'll weave in later. So this is going to hang down, and you're going to come in with your fingers, your index finger and your thumb, and you're going to come in through the middle here and sort of grab it at the bottom and then pull your fingers apart. Then what we're going to do, now as you can see I have a loop hooked around my thumb and my index finger. What we're going to do now is go up under the thumb, around, come up under from the top and come up under that index finger, and then pull that back through the thumb loop. So let me zoom in just a little bit so when I do this again you can see it up close. Okay, so let me just get our focus set. There we go. Okay, so let the yarn hang down. Come in with your fingers, grab the bottom, open it up, and it makes sort of like a diamond shape. Now take your needle, come up under that thumb, go around the finger, and back through that thumb loop, and tighten. Okay, we have 3 stitches. We're going to pick up speed here in a moment, but I'm going to do the first couple of stitches a little bit more slowly. Okay, still having that diamond shape, under the thumb, around the index finger, through the thumb loop, and tighten. Now when I say tighten, try not to tighten too much because we want to be able to work back into these stitches in a minute. Okay, still with the diamond, up under, around, and through, around, around and through, around the thumb, around the index, through the thumb loop, around, around, and through, around, around, and through. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stitches so far, and remember earlier I said we needed a total of 32. So let's pick up a little bit more speed. So that was 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, pushing things back as needed, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, pushing things back, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, and 32. Okay, so here are our stitches so we can begin our project. Okay, now as you can see the longer needles kind of help out, but if you don't have some as long as the needles I have here, shorter ones are fine. Your stitches will just be a little bit more smushed together. Okay, so let's begin row 1. Now this is a super easy pattern. Row 1, we're just going to be knitting all the stitches. Okay, so let me get my needle situated. You can grab your second needle, and as you can see, here is our tail, and we will weave that in later. I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so sometimes I like to slide my stitches up a little bit closer to the tip of the needle as I work them. And we're going to take our working yarn and we're going to go into that first stitch. Now again, I'm going to assume that you've never done this before. If you know how to do the knit stitch, just kind of skip through this part. But we are going to be knitting all stitches for row 1. So take your right needle and come up under that first stitch. Take your working yarn, wrap it around the bottom needle, bring it back from back to front, and you're going to see how you're going to catch that little loop there. Slide it on and push it off. Okay, let's do that again. Insert the needle, come up under that left needle, wrap the yarn around the bottom needle only. Now bring that bottom needle from back to front, kind of catching that loop, and that will be your stitch. Okay, let's do that again. I'm going to do it nice and slow, around, from back to front, push it off. Insert the needle, wrap the yarn, bring it from back to front, and push it off. Okay, so we're just going to do this all the way across. And as you can see, our work is slowly being transferred from the left needle to the right needle. Okay, we're shifting all those stitches over as we knit. And you can kind of push things back a little bit. And I gotta say, my needle keeps banging into my tripod, so please excuse the racket of the metal needle hitting the metal tripod. But in order to get this up nice and close for you, kind of whacks into the side of my tripod from time to time. Okay, just knitting all the way across here, and I'm already seeing with our beautiful yarn cake, I'm already seeing a little bit of subtle color changes. We went from that like steel blue color, now we're kind of moving to like a gray with some beautiful brown flecks and yellow flecks. It's a really beautiful colorway and very kind of like a fall and wintry vibe that it has going on. The yellow definitely looks like some fall leaves. Okay, last stitch of the row. Just like that. And now we're ready to move on to row 2. So what you're going to do is just kind of switch needles because we've transferred our work from the left needle to the right needle. We're just going to flip that around. And I like to just kind of straighten things out. So next, for this row, we're going to do a purl row, okay? So purl, if you're not familiar with it, is just the opposite of the knit stitch, basically. For the purl stitch, the one thing that's really important to remember is that you keep your working yarn in the front, and you'll see what I mean, okay? So I'm going to come in under my yarn. This is how I like to start. And you're going to come in and insert your needle into the front and overlap. Remember last time we went in up underneath for the knit stitch? For this one, we're going to come up front, and you can see our yarn, it's not back here, it's in the front of our project, okay? So for the purl stitch, you're going to simply wrap the yarn around the top needle this time, and then you're going to take your needle from front to back and pick up that loop and push it off, okay? Let's try that again. Insert the hook into the top, wrap the yarn around that top needle, bring the needle from the front to the back, catching that little loop and pushing it off, okay? I'm going to push my work up a little bit just to give me some more stitches within reach. And we're just going to purl every stitch on this row, okay? So insert the needle, wrap the yarn around the needle, go from front to back and push it off. Insert the needle, wrap it around, front to back, push it off, okay? So we're just going to do this all the way across for our purl stitches. Now, because we're adding some purl stitches in with our knit stitches, this is going to give us that iconic V looking stitch that you get with knitting. So if we just knit all the rows, it would give us sort of like a bumpy texture. That's called garter stitch. But if we want to do those iconic knit V's, we need to do a combination of knit one row, purl one row type of sequence, and that will give us something called stockinette stitch. Okay, so we're just purling all those stitches. Now again, if you need to see this slowed down, try using that YouTube feature that allows you to sort of slow-mo everything. Okay, and we're just working a purl in all those stitches. Okay, and push the yarn and the stitches back if you need to. Okay, just a few stitches left to work our purls. Again, we're inserting our needle into the top over top. Wrap the yarn around that top needle, push it off. Okay, just do that all the way across. pushing these stitches up as needed as well. Okay. The stockinette also gives you a nice kind of smooth front. The front and the back will look different. For garter stitch, where you knit all the rows, it's reversible. And it's a little thicker to me. It feels a little thicker. The stockinette has like a nice smooth front with a bumpy looking back. Okay, just purl those last few stitches of our row here. And then we're all ready to move on to row 3, okay? So once again, switch needles, because now our work is on this side and we need to kind of flip it over. It's kind of hard to see at this point, but you can start to see a little bit of those V's kind of sticking out. Okay, so now we're going to get our work all nice and situated. And we're going to work some eyelets on this row. So get that tail out of the way. We'll deal with that later. For row 3, we're going to knit the first stitch and the last stitch of the row. That'll give us a nice edge on our piece. But we're going to be doing some yarn overs and knit 2 togethers to give us a beautiful eyelet row. Okay? So what we want to do is just go ahead and knit that first stitch, just like that, like we've been doing. Then we're going to yarn over, just wrapping the yarn around that right needle, and then knit 2 together. And you just do that by, it's just the knit stitch, but instead you're inserting your needle into 2 stitches at once. And then wrap the yarn around that bottom needle, bring it from back to front, and push it off. Okay? Yarn over and knit 2 together. All the way across until there's just 1 stitch left of our row. Yarn over, knit 2 together. Yarn over, knit 2 together. Pushing those stitches up as needed. Yarn over, knit 2 together, and so forth. So I'm going to continue across the row, and you can start to see some little eyelets are forming. You can sort of see the light through the piece. So just keep continuing by working your yarn over, knit 2 together, okay? All the way across until there's just 1 stitch left on the row, and I'm going to show you what to do next. Okay, we're in the home stretch. Yarn over, knit 2 together, and then like I mentioned before, there should be 1 stitch left, and you're just going to knit that last stitch. Okay? Okay, so row 3 is complete. Now you may not see much of the eyelets yet, but as you add more and more rows, those eyelets are going to emerge, and it's going to look really pretty and decorative, but it's super easy to do. Okay? So for row 4, what we're going to do is just, once again, we're just going to knit all those rows, okay? So you'll just want to knit all the rows. Now, we're actually, if you notice, we are actually have our wrong side, or our purl side, facing us, as you can see from all the little ridges. By knitting on the wrong side, it's going to give us a fun little decorative ridge in our work right by these eyelets, which I thought would be really pretty, and add a little bit of texture to it. If you are strongly opposed to the little ridge in your work and you want that very kind of smooth stockinette look, you can just purl this row if you wish. But I wanted to give it a little tiny bit more texture and knit this row on the wrong side. So just as a side note. But we're just going to knit all of the stitches on this row. And as I'm looking at my yarn, in just a short time, my yarn cake will be switching over to the yellow, so that should be a lot of fun too. So for row 4, we're just going to knit all the way across here. And I know a lot of you like to knit as much as possible and kind of minimize the purling, so I did stick this knit row on the purl side for you. But again, if you don't want that little decorative ridge in your work, and I'll show you when I'm finished this row, we'll flip it over and look at the right side. But you know, you could just leave this as a purl row if you prefer. but I love texture, and especially with these chunky yarns and all this beautiful like fallish color that we have going on. I just thought adding a little bit of texture definitely wouldn't hurt. Okay, so once again, row 4, I just knit all those stitches all the way across. Now let's look at our handiwork here. As you can see, it's just barely visible here. You can see that we have this little decorative ridge that's going to form in our work. So you have those sort of iconic V's that I was talking about earlier, and if we zoom in, there we go. You can see just at the top here are some little like nubs, some little like pearly bumps. Okay, so what you're going to do to continue with your project is work rows 1 through 4 over and over and over again. And the best thing to do, because we're going to be seaming this, is you'll want to end on row 2. And that's going to give you a nice kind of substantial edge. You don't want to end on like row 3 or anything like that, because that's our eyelet row, and that would be harder to seam. It wouldn't give you that like more cleaner edge. So ending on row 2, and we're going to work through all 3 of our yarn cakes for this. Okay, so I'm just going to continue working rows 1 through 4. We're going to rejoin. I'm going to give you a little bit of length calculations of what we've come up with, and then we're going to learn how to bind off, which is getting this off of this needle, and then we're going to learn how to bring it together and seam it. Now, as you're working, if you're using different yarn or different needles or things like that, if you would like to also, if you would like a different size or more drape or a little bit snug around the neck, just kind of try it on as you work. That's what I usually do, just to see what kind of length that I'm after, okay? So just keep working rows 1 through 4, ending on row 2 to give you that nice clean edge. We're going to rejoin in just a moment, and I'm going to show you how to just finish up the rest of the project. Okay, so I've worked through my first cake, and as promised, we're rejoining so I can show you how to join on the new cake of yarn that I have here. Now, just as a side note, if you're using the same yarn as me and you had the same number of cast-on stitches, you're going to get a height of about 14 inches, give or take, okay? Depending on your tension as well. That's also a big factor. So just as a side note for length, so I went ahead and located the center of my yarn cake. Sometimes you have to dig for it a little bit. So when joining yarn, there's lots of different ways to do it. I like to just simply, now I just had a little tiny bit here, so that's going to be a tail later on. But I like to just simply tie it right on. There are fancier ways to do it. We're keeping it simple though today. So I'm just going to tie my new strand just around my old strand. And then I just like to take it and push it up against the stitch. Okay, that's all. And it'll just blend in, and we'll weave in the ends towards the end of the video, and I'll show you how to do that. So all we're going to do now is, now we might need to, yeah, bring that down to the bottom there. Okay, now you'll have 2 strands. You can just get, or tails, you'll just kind of kick those out of the way for now. Get your working yarn, and make sure that knot is sort of at the bottom. And all we're going to do is just continue on with our project. Now when you weave in the ends, it'll kind of pull that knot in and blend it away, sort of, okay? So all we do now is just knit or purl, depending on where you're on, as usual within our pattern, okay? So we've just joined on the second yarn cake, and then after that we'll join on the third yarn cake. And then when we're finished, I'm going to show you how to bind off the stitches of your project. We'll weave in some ends, and then we'll seam it to make that beautiful V-shaped cowl as shown at the beginning of the video, okay? So just continue on with your work, and when we rejoin, we'll do a little bit of finish work and some seaming. Alright, so I'm just working those last couple of purl stitches of the very last row. Now, if you remember, I mentioned before when we were learning how to work the stitch, you want to end on row 2, because that will give you a nice clean look. Okay, so once you've worked all of your rows and gotten the size that you need, now I would recommend taking your tape measure and measuring, or you can kind of throw it around your neck and see. So I just wanted to show you. Now I did what I was saying, I just threw mine around my neck, to get the right size. But let me just show you where we're at here. You can use your tape measure for this. Now if you measure down to the starting edge and you go all the way down here, mine was about 32 inches, okay, just to give you an idea, but definitely try it on to see what you like best. So next what we're going to do, now we're back to the right side of row. This is why I say to end on row 2, because we're going to bind off as if to knit. Now you can do it, you can bind off as if to purl, but ending on row 2 will put you on that right side of your work, and you can bind off knit-wise, okay? So to bind off, I'm going to show you real quick how to do that. It's super easy if you've never done it before. Now there's other ways to bind off. This is just a really easy way, okay? So all you're going to do is you're going to knit a stitch, and we learned how to do that earlier, so you can see that. Then we're going to knit a second stitch, okay? Then what you're going to do is you're going to take your needle and you're going to take this loop that's closest to you, the first stitch that you knitted, and you're going to stick your left needle in there and you're going to lift it up over that other loop and off the needle, just like that, okay? Let's do that a couple more times. So you have just one loop on your needle now. So knit a stitch. Now take that needle and lift it up, over, and off. Knit another stitch. Now take your needle, lift it up, over, and off. Knit another stitch. And you're just going to do this all the way across. And you're going to get this nice edge and get the work off of your needles when you're finished. Okay? So lift it up, over, and off. Knit the stitch. Lift it up, over, and off. Knit the stitch, lift it up, over, and off. And we're just doing this all the way across. And we're going to do the whole thing together, just so you can see it in action. Knit the stitch, lift it up, over, and off. Now, I do it with my needles. I've seen people that will knit the stitch and then take your finger and lift it up and over. But I find, I guess it's what you get used to. I find that I can do it more efficiently this way. But if you prefer, you can use your fingers to lift the loop up over that other loop and off, okay? It's just personal preference. Now, like I mentioned before, there's tons and tons of other ways to bind off your work. This one is quick and easy. You can do different bind offs if you'd like to produce a different edge on your work as well. So if you need something a little different looking than this, definitely check out other ways to bind off if you're curious. Okay, we got about halfway through, and I just wanted to kind of stop and show you our edge. So as you can see, we have this nice edge on our work, okay? Now let's take care of these last group of stitches on our row here. And once again, I apologize for my noisy metal needles. If you don't like noisy needles, definitely try like wood or bamboo, or even plastic is a little less noisy. But I do have my table surface here, and they're sort of dragging around. Actually, using shorter needles. Mine are pretty long because this was a wide project. But if you can use shorter needles, and they'll bump things a lot less. Okay, so we're just binding off those last few stitches. And I wanted to mention too, if you're a beginner knitter and you're just learning how to knit, I commend you on hanging out with me today and learning how to make this easy project. I actually learned how to knit. I do mostly crochet these days, but I actually learned how to knit first. I taught myself how to knit years and years and years ago, and it's something that I'll pick it up once in a while and work on it. And it's very fun and relaxing. And you know, if you are a crocheter, it's another fun skill to learn. It kind of gives you a different perspective. Okay, so we are down to our last stitch here. So go ahead and knit that last stitch and then bring that loop up, over, and off. And as you can see, I don't have any more stitches on my needle. So what we can do now is cut our yarn. So go ahead and just leave that loop on there for a moment. And let me just scoot my project over so you can see what I'm doing here. Now, I am going to use this tail to seam the edges together. So I want to cut a nice long tail. So I'm going to do about, 24 to 36 inches. It's better to do a little more than you think you'll need. You can always trim it later, okay? All right, so we can get our needle out of the way. And then what we want to do is go back to this loop and just loosen it up a little bit and take this tail through that loop, okay? Now again, I made my tail nice and long, a little extra long, because I'm going to use mine to seam up my work, okay? So just tighten that down. Then we can get our needles out of the way, we can get our yarn out of the way, and I've grabbed a tapestry needle that's pretty thick. It has a nice large eye, and it's a little sturdier for this weight yarn, okay? Now, we have some tails we need to deal with first, so let's take care of those first. Now, what you'll want to do, whenever you're using variegated yarn, or if you've done stripes, anytime you have multiple colors, I went ahead and threaded my tapestry needle as a side note. You'll want to stay in that color family. So I have this dark blue here. I'm going to weave my end in, staying only in the dark blue section of my work, okay? You might need to wiggle things through a little bit. And I also like to go in one direction and then I come back in the other direction. If you notice too, I'm on the wrong side of my work. That was the purl side. You want to keep your ends in the wrong side of your work. And then grab your scissors. I went in both directions with my tail and then just trim. Now I have another tail here and I have some down here. So I'm going to go ahead and weave those in. And the next thing we're going to do is seam it together. Okay, so you'll want to make it so that the wrong side is facing up, that purl side. Bring the two sides in. Now remember, here's our tail that we left intact. Keep that at the bottom corner here. Then what you're going to do, this is our starting edge where we began. Fold it down so that it comes to a point at the bottom. And then this top edge here where we finished is going to go along the side here, okay? So the bottom right corner where we began is going to join with the bottom corner of where that tail is, okay? And then this seam will be sort of asymmetric on the shoulder. So when you wear it, it's going to look like a V down the front of you, okay? So once we figured out where to seam it, let's sandwich this together like so. And then what we're going to do is take our tail, our long tail that we've saved. Now, if you didn't cut a long tail, if you accidentally cut it too short, you can always tie one on, okay? Just thread a long piece of yarn onto your needle, okay? So then what we're going to do is sort of sandwich it together, and once we've figured it out where it needs to go, we're going to sort of work from the inside. So the easiest way to do it is to grab that edge and just grab this edge up top here and flip it over. Now you can sew it from the front, that's okay too. But now we have our edge that we're going to be seaming together, okay? So take your needle and you're going to go through both layers. And you want to make your seam as neat as possible because that seam is going to be sitting on your shoulder when you wear it, okay? The point's going to come down in the front. And so what I like to do is sort of, you can stop and check your work, flip it right side out, and just see how it's going, okay? But you want to make sure you go into 2 loops of the top edge of your sandwich. Let me zoom in a little bit. And then 2 loops in the bottom edge of your little sandwich here, okay? Now I did make this nice and long so that we have plenty to work with. We don't want to run out halfway through. Okay, and so we're just going to go into both layers here. Pull the yarn through, and I would recommend not rushing this part because you want your finish work. We spent a lot of time making this, so you want your finish work to be nice and neat and it'll really make a huge difference when you go to wear the piece, okay? All right, so we're just working. Now this, as a side note, this is a whip stitch. A whip stitch is just it's basically a spiral. You're making a spiral type stitch through your work. It's a nice, neat looking stitch that's pretty invisible, and it's easy to do. It's nice and secure, and it's pretty quick as well. Now, if you happen to end where this, if you use the same color as me, you have this like bright yellow, you may want to cut a new piece instead of taking bright yellow down the seam. You want to see how I chose, well, I just happened to end on the gray, but you want to use a color that's going to sort of blend. You don't want your seam to be the star of the show here. You want that to sort of disappear, okay? That's why we're working inside out, because I don't know if you can see this, but you can sort of see the spiral here. When we turn it right side out, it's going to be more camouflaged, okay? So you want to work on the inside, and you'll want to use a piece of neutral yarn to do your seam. I didn't mention that earlier, but you definitely don't want to do this like light blue that you see over here or the bright yellow. You want to just keep it nice and neutral as possible, okay? So that's why this gray works quite well for our seam. Okay, so we're just working our way across, working into both of those layers. So I'm going to continue working my seam across, and then we'll rejoin in just a moment, and we're going to finish this project completely up, and then we'll turn it right side out and see how we've done. All right, all of our ends have been taken care of, and I just wanted to point out the beautiful colors in this. It's just so fallish, and it really will take you right into winter as well. So what we want to do is, this is the right side, flip it over to the wrong side, because we're going to learn how to seam this so that we can wear it. Now, we want to have a point at the bottom, so what we want to do is take our starting edge where we began, and we're going to seam okay, so we're almost to the edge here. I'm just going to put a few more stitches. Now those first couple of stitches and those last couple of stitches that you do, you want to make sure they're nice and secure, because that's really, those edges get the most stress on them as you wear them, the opening of the neck and then the bottom. Okay, so here's our last stitch. Now, when you do your last stitch, don't pull the loop all the way through. Run your needle in the loop, and that'll create a knot. And then what I like to do is do another knot just to keep it nice and secure here. Okay, so you can push that knot all the way down, and if you really want to, you could do another knot as well, okay, just to keep things in place. Things that you wear and wear repeatedly get the most amount of a workout, really, so you want to make sure that everything is nice and neat, okay? So the last thing we need to do is weave in our ends. Now, I'm not going to go down here because that's light blue. I want to stay out of that area. I'm going to weave it into this brown area. It'll blend much more nicely, okay? So just go in one direction like we did before with our other ends. And if you go through that seam like I did, it'll be a little snug, but that's okay. So go in one direction, come back in the other direction with your needle. You might need to shimmy it through there, give it a little wiggle. All right, so we are finished. So just cut that last little bit. And if you notice, I didn't cut my tail. I kept it on the needle and just did my weaving in that way. Okay, so we're still on the wrong side. Let me zoom out so you can see what I'm doing here. We're going to pull it back out. You can see our seam looks really nice and neat, okay? It's where that blue sort of came along the edge and it met the other edge, okay? So if we turn our work And I really love how you get the full display of color from the front. This seam that we just did is sort of going to go on your shoulder because you want that point, this point here, to go down the front of you, okay? So it's almost like a little like faux kind of mini poncho look, okay? And then your head will come out here. Hop on over to the Fiber Flux blog to check out you know, the ways to style it. You can wear it different ways too. You could even wear it as a traditional cowl like this and wear the point down the back of you, okay? So try the different ways. And this is a really beautiful project for fall and winter, and it's so cozy, so fun and cozy. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure and click the subscribe button to get all the latest Fiber Flux video updates. Thanks again.